Section 7 of Early Greek Philosophy by Alfred William Benn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 3. The Analytical Philosophers, Part 1. 1. Zeno of Elea. Parmenides seems never to have made more than one disciple. This was a young Eleat named Zeno, to whom he was united not only by common opinions, but by the bonds of devoted private affection. Yet, closely as they agreed in principle, the two thinkers belonged to distinct ages with widely contrasted tendencies and methods, the one dogmatic, the other argumentative, the one more comprehensive, the other more analytic, the one potent to unite and simplify, the other excelling in subtlety and minuteness. What struck people most about the philosophy of Parmenides was that it denied motion, and to such a laughter-loving race as the Greeks, this paradox gave much occasion for ridicule. Zeno came to his master's assistance by showing, or attempting to show, that the idea of motion involves greater difficulties than its denial, and this he did by a series of examples whose interest is not exhausted even for the speculation of our own times. His most celebrated puzzle is that known as Achilles and the tortoise. Let us suppose that there is a race between the two, and that the tortoise is allowed a start, say, of 10 feet. Then Achilles will never overtake his slow-footed competitor, for while he is getting over the first 10 feet, the tortoise will have accomplished, say, 1 foot, or as much less than that as you please. Anyhow, it will be some measurable distance, however small. Then, while Achilles is traversing that space, the tortoise will have advanced through the same fraction of it as before, and so on ad infinitum. It is no answer to say that, as a matter of fact, the swifter does always overtake the slower runner. The question is how space can be conceived except as infinitely divisible, and how, granting that, an infinite number of divisions can be run through in a finite time. It has been suggested as a solution that the infinite divisibility of time makes this possible, but in fact it only doubles the difficulty, for then we have 2 infinite series to be run out instead of 1. Skeptical arguments are dangerous allies to dogmatic theories, and Zeno's method might have been turned with destructive effect against his master, for it goes to disprove the possibility of continuously extended space as a thing in itself, and this Parmenides had assumed without question, nor indeed was it questioned until thousands of years after his time. 2. Empedocles. Change and motion held their own notwithstanding all that the Eleatics could say to prove their impossibility, but Parmenides, by his daring paradoxes, had brought into full view an aspect of the truth that Heracleitus, going to the opposite extreme, had tended to obscure, and that common sense had yet to learn as something self-evident when it was once stated. This was the perpetuity through all change of a reality underlying appearance, a substance that is neither created nor destroyed. We may say that the Ionians had practically assumed the existence of such a substance, variously identifying it with one of the so-called elements, water, air, earth, or fire. But their analysis had been what chemists call qualitative rather than quantitative. They did not sharply formulate the generalization that matter persists through all metamorphoses without loss or gain. Heracleitus alone, with his wonderful sagacity, grazed but did not grasp this law. Fully to realize it was reserved for the inferior genius of Empedocles. Empedocles stands as an isolated, somewhat problematic figure among the early Greek philosophers. By exception, he was not an Ionian, but a Dorian. by exception, not an aristocrat, but a democrat. His restless and insatiable vanity also makes an unpleasant contrast with the singular personal majesty of the rest. For the first, though not for the last time in history, he makes us feel that to be a charlatan and a great thinker are not incompatible predicates. His birthplace may have had something to do with his ambiguous character and attitude. This was Acragas, the modern Girgenti, a Sicilian city, renowned for the luxury of its inhabitants and the splendor of its public edifices, still as ruins preeminent among the glories of Doric architecture. It was a chief seat of the Chthonian religion, whose two great goddesses, Demeter and Persephone, were especial objects of popular worship. Standing, moreover, almost on the frontier between Hellenic and Phoenician civilization, Acragas was exposed in a peculiar way to the evil influences of Semitic example, with the least restraint from the old Greek traditions of Sophrosony, of self-knowledge and self-control. Empedocles tells his countrymen that he walked through the Sicilian cities crowned with garlands, honored as an immortal god, followed by crowds of men and women entreating him to heal their diseases, to give them oracles, to show them the way to gain. What the multitude asked from Empedocles was no more than his philosophy undertook to give. His disciples were to learn the arts by which old age is warded off, the winds controlled, and the dead restored to life. Our prophet claimed, in fact, to be nothing less than a fallen divinity, who, in some far distant prenatal stage of existence, had stained himself with bloodshed, and was condemned, as an expiation of his guilt, to pass through a long cycle of existences, vegetable, animal, and human, as a dweller in the water, in the air, or on the earth. Apparently, the period of purification was now nearly complete, and his restoration to the abodes of the blessed in sight. Like the sages of the Far East, he preached the kinship of all living things, the sacredness of animal life, and the pollution incurred by eating meat. A deep vein of Oriental pessimism also enters into his theory of existence. Standing alone, such utterances might be interpreted as no more than an enthusiastic expression of the new Orphic religion, derived proximately from the Pythagorean schools of South Italy. The puzzling thing is that they have come down to us in close association with a thoroughly materialistic philosophy, where no place seems to be left for an immortal human soul, and hardly even for gods, except as poetic names for the elements and forces of nature. Empedocles lived toward the middle of the 5th century B.C. One is tempted to think of him as a modernist in reference to the religion of his age, giving a mythological coloring to speculations really destructive of all mythology. 3. The four elements. No wise man, the Sicilian philosopher tells us, would imagine that mortals had no existence before their birth, and will have none after their dissolution. These words might be taken to imply the soul's eternity, but probably they mean no more than that the body is composed of imperishable parts. Empedocles is credibly reported to have been a pupil of Parmenides, and he repeats the master's assertion that what is can neither begin nor cease to be, but without pushing it to the extremity of denying all reality to change and motion. What men call birth and death are simply a mixture and separation of pre-existing substances. Fire, air, earth, and water are the ultimate elements whence all things arise and into which they return. Each of these has been erected by one or other of the Ionian thinkers into the sole principle of nature. Empedocles follows the facile method of eclectics in every age by granting equal rights to all, and his philosophy has left a permanent stamp on language which the discoveries of modern chemistry have not been able to efface. 4. Love and strife. The tendency to harmonize and combine carries him on to a further and more daring speculative effort. Parmenides has to be reconciled not only with common sense, but also with Heracleitus. Experience tells us that the world is not now constituted as a perfect homogeneous sphere, in the way dreamed of at Alea, but that happy consummation has been reached already in the eternal revolutions of existence, and will be reached again. Two powers control the universal process: love and strife. Love drawing the elements into one, strife tearing them apart, and the whole world cycle passes through 4 phases distinguished by their alternating predominance and decline. As love gains ground, things draw together. When it triumphs, they are united in the perfect sphere, but only to fly asunder on their way to complete separation when strife becomes lord of the ascendant. We are now on the downgrade, that is to say, we are living in a period of increasing differentiation and ever greater subjection of nature to the law of strife. Empedocles may have been led to this gloomy diagnosis by the sentence in which Heracleitus speaks of war as the father of all things. Love and strife answer in some ways to the attractive and repulsive forces of modern science, but they are conceived as material, or at least as extended objects, with just as much or just as little self-consciousness as the 4 elements. We ourselves are composed of all 6, and as like is only known by like, we recognize the presence of each in the external world through that portion of it which helps to make up our separate individuality. 5. Theory of sensation. A current phrase speaks of the external world as known to us through the channels of sense. The phrase is now merely metaphorical, but it contains a reminiscence of what Empedocles thought literal truth. He imagined that streams of material particles emanated from the bodies about us, and that these made their way through certain minute passages or pores with which the organs of sense were supplied, thus producing the characteristic sensation by which the element within is enabled to recognize the element from without as akin to itself. There is an exact adaptation between the particles and the pores of the same element, so that fire, for example, is only penetrable by fire, and water by water. By this theory, much more than by his ambitious cosmology, Empedocles showed himself an original and progressive thinker, in harmony, like Zeno, with the minutely analytical tendencies of his age, and contributing far more than Zeno to the subsequent development of speculation. End of section 7.